everybody, it's Mel. Thank you so much for joining me today for my June wrap-up. So in the month of June, I was intending to participate in the Adventure-a-thon readathon, which is a readathon that was created by Kirsty over at Beth Bookish. It sounded like a really fun readathon, and I know a lot of people had a great deal of fun with it, but I just didn't quite manage to do it. I still read a bunch, but just sticking to a TBR has turned into something I can't do at the moment. So you may know, if you've watched some of my videos recently, in last term 2 of the school year here in Tassie, I picked up a contract 3 days a week, and it's not full-time at all, but it was still a lot of work, and I just didn't quite manage to read as much as I normally do or do as many videos as I normally do, and sticking to a TBR wasn't something that I was finding I was able to do, particularly in June, because I also got sick. I had COVID, which I had symptoms of and was feeling a little bit unwell with, but then once I got over COVID, I ended up picking up a secondary infection, and that made me really sick, and also my grandmother died, so I just needed to mood read, and yeah, unfortunately I haven't managed to do Adventure-a-thon, so sorry about that, Kirsty. But like I said, I did manage to read some books, just a lot of them weren't on my TBR, so yeah. TBRs aren't really working out as a thing for me, but that's okay, that's fine. But anyway, let's have a look at what I read and what I thought of them. Just got my trusty journal here. Okay, so the first thing that I actually read in the month of June was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I am actually doing a vlog, and this was one of the books that I read for that vlog. I'm not sure when the vlog will be going up, not anytime particularly soon. So anyway, you'll find out more about that later, and a bit more in-depth information about my feelings about it in general, but let's start with the basics. This is a book that is told in dual timeline and dual points of view. We have the point of view of Evelyn Hugo, and we have the point of view of a person called Monique. So the setup is that Evelyn Hugo is a Hollywood, she's now in her 70s, during the current timeline. She's in her 70s, but she still is a famous Hollywood actress, but she hasn't been in anything for a while. But she used to be a very famous Hollywood actress, a very famous kind of it girl around Hollywood, and she was beautiful. She was in lots of scandals. She was in the tabloids. She was in papers all the time. She was both famous and infamous, but nobody really knows the kind of truth about who she was or what she felt. And yes, she had 7 husbands, she was married 7 times, but none of these people were the great love of her life. So then we flip through to the other character, who is Monique, and Monique is a journalist who is working for a magazine like, I don't know, Cosmopolitan or something like that. It's an invented one. And she is offered the role of interviewing Evelyn Hugo and getting like the real scoop about Evelyn Hugo and who the real love of her life was, and kind of an expose on her life. Evelyn Hugo chose Monique, and no one really knows why, but her boss sends her over to do this interview, and yeah, they start having the interview, and Evelyn Hugo tells the story of her life. It turns out that the real love of her life was never a man at all. It was a woman. She was a woman, and at the time, between 1950 and 1980, being bisexual in that time period was not something that was a particularly easy thing, and she would have faced a lot of discrimination. So she chose to live as straight, and it's about her giving this story to Monique. This is my second Taylor Jenkins Reid book. Like I said when I read Daisy Jones and the Six, which is the first book I've ever read of Taylor Jenkins Reid. I understand why people like her writing so much. I think she has a lot of ambitious ideas. I think that she explores some topics that people are really interested in, like the music industry, like Hollywood society, being a famous actress. It's fun to read a book from those perspectives. I do think Taylor Jenkins Reid is a good writer. I think she pulls it off quite well, but these books are never, okay, I've read 2 books of hers, but neither of them have lived up to the hype that surrounds them. I think she's a good writer. I just don't think she's as amazing and fantastic as everyone makes out. So I enjoyed it, but it was still a little bit of a letdown for me just because it just didn't quite live up to the hype. I wasn't blown away in the way that it seems like everyone else has been. I don't know if it's just that I'm coming late to the party, but yeah. It was good. It wasn't amazing. I did give it 3.5 stars, so I mean, it's not like I hated it at all. I did quite enjoy it. I do think she's good at writing characters, and I think she's good at writing quite flawed characters really, really well in a really sympathetic way and making it very human, because humans aren't one-dimensional. They aren't just one characteristic. They do have flaws as well as good things, and I think that that's something that she's very good at. And I did, like I said, I did enjoy it. I gave it 3.5 stars. It just didn't blow me away, but you know, I'm glad I read it. In Core Pile, that is 6.71, by the way. Next up is The Flatshare by Beth O'Leary. This is actually my 3rd time reading this book, and I absolutely love this book. This was Beth O'Leary's debut. It was the first book, obviously, therefore, that I read by her, and I just loved it. And I've read 2 of her other books. Yes, I've read 2 of her other books and I really enjoy them as well, but this is definitely my favourite. I think that it's very, very clever. It is kind of a silly premise. So the premise of the story is that Leon is the primary tenant in this flat in London, but he needs a little bit of extra money, and so he and his partner come up with a plan because he works at night, so he's not in the flat from sort of about 5:30, 6 o'clock until, say, around sort of 8:30 or something like that. He decides to rent out his flat to someone else who works during the day, and so therefore they would never actually cross paths or see each other. So it's a 1-bedroom, 1-bed flat, and yeah, that's what he comes up with, because the person will use the bed, so it would be as though they were the only people in the flat, but they were sharing a bed, but they never met. It's a very silly premise and setup, like I said, but it works really, really well. And I definitely, just like Taylor Jenkins Reid, Beth O'Leary's strength in her writing is her characters. I thought that she wrote both the main characters in this story. So we have Leon, who is the person that is the main tenant, and then we have Tiffy, who ends up being the sub-tenant, the subletter. For quite a while they don't meet, but they start writing little notes to each other, and it starts out as just, hey, I made some casserole, do you want half or whatever, do you want my leftovers, kind of thing. But then it ends up being like they're actually communicating via these notes, and for a long time they don't meet, but they're developing this friendship throughout these notes, and it kind of goes from there. As you can imagine, there is a romance. I'm not sure if you would call this a kind of general fiction or whether it's specifically a romance. I mean, the romance definitely a big plot point in the story, but there's a lot more going on than that, particularly for Tiffy. So Tiffy has just gotten out of a very toxic relationship, and she's not even aware of just the extent to which it was toxic. The story is exploring her figuring that out, and figuring out what to do, trying to find herself, find her footing again, and come back to herself, and deal with those situations. But yeah, like I said, I just love Beth O'Leary's writing style. I think she weaves a really fun, silly story together with some really hard-hitting topics incredibly well. It is very, in a lot of ways, fun and light-hearted, but like I said, it does have some really hard-hitting topics which are definitely dealt with really well with a really deft hand. I feel like it does them a lot of justice without dragging the reader down into a really difficult reading situation, you can still feel like you can approach it with a light-hearted fashion, if that makes any sense. So yeah, I would highly recommend this, particularly if you do enjoy a contemporary general fiction or romance. I just think that Beth O'Leary is incredibly good at writing characters, incredibly good at writing sort of just general people's stories, at writing trauma in a way, like I said, that makes it very approachable. But yeah, I would highly recommend. Absolutely loved it. On Core Pile, I gave this one 9.14, which is 5 stars. The next thing that I read was actually a comic. So it was the first comic in the Sandman series by Neil Gaiman. I have borrowed a massive bind-up volume of a bunch of Neil Gaiman's Sandman comics from a friend of mine, but it is actually massive and heavy, and yeah, I didn't really want to hold it up while I was talking about it, so I'm just going to put the image somewhere. So this was the first comic, like I said, so it's about sort of, I don't know, 50 pages long or something like that, with pictures, so it was very quick and easy to read. I love Neil Gaiman as an author. I have read many of his books. I'm not actually sure how many books he's written, but I've read a lot of them, but I've never read the Sandman comics because I'm not a huge comic book reader, but recently I've been trying to change that, and I have been getting more and more into graphic novels and comics. It also helped that I watched the Netflix adaptation earlier this year, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, which I expected to. It's not, like I said, that I don't expect that I'll enjoy the story of the Sandman. It's just, I just am not a huge comic reader. But I wanted to give it a go because I watched the TV show and I absolutely loved it. I love Neil Gaiman and I really enjoyed this book. I gave it a 4 stars on Core Pile, on star rating, but Core Pile was 7.71, so I did really enjoy this one. So as I said, this is the first in quite a long series. The setup is that there is a cultist, I think they're just called, in the late Victorian age, so sort of 1890-ish, who decides that he wants to capture Death because he wants his son to be returned to him, his son who's died. And so he performs this ritual to try and capture Death. However, he doesn't manage to capture Death. Instead, he manages to capture Sleep. So Morpheus, who is the god of sleep, is it Morpheus or is it Orpheus? It is Morpheus, the Sandman, otherwise known as Dream, so the kind of deity personification of Dream, and they realise their mistake, but they decide that they want to keep them captured anyway, for like 50 or 60 years or something like that. And while this is happening, a bunch of different people, when they fall asleep, they can't wake, and then a bunch of other people around the world can't sleep ever. And that's the first comic. Obviously there's more going on in the series. I haven't read any further than that, but I did really enjoy it. I like the writing style and I like the art style. The artist, the illustrator, is a different person from Neil Gaiman, and I'm not 100% sure who they are, but I will put the information in the description below. But I thought it was really clever, and I do know more of what's going to happen because I have watched the show, as I said, but I'm excited to see what Neil Gaiman has done with the series. And yeah, it was a good time, and I'm glad I had a look at it. And like I said, I intend to read some more. The cat has kind of like put herself in the corner, and she doesn't have very much room, but she's trying to clean herself while she's in the corner where she has no room. I'm not really sure what she's doing. Cats. Next up is Dark Rise by C.S. Pacat. I don't know that this particular series is as well known as their other series. They are the author that wrote the Fence graphic novel series, which I've heard amazing things about by a number of different booktubers that I follow. Are you okay there? What are you doing, Shade? Oh, okay. She's left. Anyway, sorry about the cat interruption. But yes, I read this for my Ko-Fi book club. This was chosen for us by Ash from Ash's Adventures in Book. books, so thank you very much, Ash. I actually really enjoyed this one. I really didn't know what to expect at all, but I ended up really enjoying it. It reminded me quite a bit of the Lord of the Rings and also a little bit of the Wheel of Time series, which are two books that I have, or series that I have enjoyed in the past. So this is I think it's probably new adult from the age of the characters, but also the writing style. I would say it was more aimed at that new adult kind of age. Anyway, it is a historic fantasy, so it's sort of set in an alternative England. We follow a few different characters, one of whom is called Will, one of whom is called Violet, and then there's a few other different characters that we kind of get their perspective a little bit as well. The setup of the story is that Will is on the run. His mother was killed by this gang that he doesn't really know why, and he's on the run. And then this girl, Violet, is a part, or her brother is a part of this gang that have captured Will. And she really wants to be part of the gang. She wants to do what her brother's doing. She thinks it's just imports and exports. She doesn't know about the kidnapping and other kind of mafia style of work that they do. Hello everybody, Editing Mel here. I just realised that I went on a massive, somewhat spoilery description of this book, which didn't make a whole lot of sense. So I'm just going to skip through to where I talk about what I liked and what I didn't like. I'm not going to go any further than that because I don't want to give any spoilers, but yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought that it was really well written. I really love the way that the story was structured. I like the beats and the pacing. I did enjoy both main characters' perspectives and the other characters as well, although I think the world building and the setup is probably the strongest side of the story. It's really fast paced and really action driven, but well written characters as well. So like I said, I did really enjoy this one. I gave it a 7.29 in Core which translates to 4 stars, so definitely a book that I would recommend. Next up was another reread for me, and that is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. So this is a book that I read with my best friend Michelle. She had not read it before, and I don't think realised I had read it before, but that's okay. I agreed to the buddy read anyway because, you know, I enjoyed it last time, so I wanted to see if I would still enjoy it. I feel like The Secret History is pretty well known generally, so I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail, but it is sort of touted as being the original dark academia book. So dark academia stems from Gothic literature, so yeah, it's the first book that was sort of touted as being the thing that turned dark academia into its own genre outside of Gothic literature. So it still has a lot of those Gothic vibes, Gothic overtones, but it is specifically set in a college or a university. And this particular book, we follow Richard. It's from his perspective. He is a student who is attending this very small but very prestigious college in Hampton in the United States. He has studied in the past Greek and classics, and he wants to do that again at this college, but the professor who teaches those courses is a very odd character. He's a bit of an elitist, and he has set it up so that he will only have a very small number of students, and you kind of have to win him over and have to prove yourself to him. So initially Richard doesn't manage to get into the group, but then I can't remember what he does, but he does something that impresses the professor and he decides to take him on as well. So the groups that are studying or were originally studying with this professor studying classics are very tightly knit. So it's about this really toxic group of people with toxic relationships between this group of people and where it leads them to. I did enjoy this book. I gave it a 3.5 stars, which in Core Pile is 6.86. Definitely understand why people like it, and I can definitely understand why I think it's considered a modern classic, or potentially soon will be. Not sure, but definitely see why it's lauded the way that it is. I think that Donna Tartt is incredibly intelligent. I think the way that she has written this book and constructed this book is really very clever, and I really appreciated it for that. I really appreciated the character work. I thought that she wrote some really amoral and just kind of really not very likable characters really, really well. The only thing is that it was too long. It was too long for me, and there are lots of different different points in the book where I kind of feel like, yeah, okay, but can you get on with the story, please? So although there are some good moments that are flesh out the characters quite well, in particular Richard, it's just not necessary for it to be that long or that detailed. I also found it kind of pretentious, and I think that's intended because the setting is very pretentious. The way that this professor has set up his teaching is very pretentious. Other characters, the other people that he's studying with, are very pretentious. So I think it is deliberate, but it was just a little bit pretentious. It just, yeah, for reading as well. So it was good, but it was not the most amazing thing I've ever read, but I did enjoy it, and I did get something out of it, and I enjoyed reading it with my friend Michelle. The final book that I completed in June was Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. If you are a part of BookTube or you watch BookTubers regularly, I don't think you would not know what this book is about, but for those people that may not have managed to see it, it says on the front here, it says high fantasy, low stakes, good company. And that is exactly what this book is about. So this is a high fantasy setting. It's a high fantasy world with high fantasy characters. We follow our main character Viv, who is an orc barbarian, but we come to her at the end of her final adventure, and she takes the spoils from this adventure that her part of it that she wants, and she goes off to one of the cities and she decides to set up a coffee shop. Now, she's chosen this city despite the fact that they've never heard of coffee. Coffee is a gnomish invention, a gnomish drink, and there are few gnomes in this city, but there's no coffee shops, it's not sold at, pubs or whatever. So nobody knows what it is, and she decides to open a cafe. And it's about that. It's about the opening of the cafe. It's about her finding people to work for her and to become friends with. It's literally about the building of the cafe. You would think that something that was low stakes like that wouldn't be particularly interesting to read about, particularly given that it's a high fantasy setting. You expect, big adventures, high stakes, lots to be won or lost. And that's not the case. It is really fun. It is really well written. It was so cozy and lovely. I really, really enjoyed the characters. I thought they're incredibly well written. I love Viv as a character. I said in my mid-year freakout tag, which I will link below if you want to go and check that out, that Viv was my favourite character so far this year. I just really, really enjoyed the way that she was written. I love how vulnerable she was, even despite the fact that she's an orc barbarian, because she's doing this new thing and she's going out on a limb and she's doing something that's out of her comfort zone. And she approaches that in a really brave way. So it's a really fun way at looking at some of those high fantasy elements to do with bravery and facing your fears and meeting obstacles, but in a more contemporary kind of setting, in that it is about someone setting up a new business, setting up a coffee shop. She ends up employing this rat character whose name I have completely forgotten. Let's see if I can find it. Thimble, that's his name, and he is a baker, and she employs him to make various different baked goods, and it's kind of like he's inventing these different baked goods that we know really well. He makes biscotti, he makes cinnamon scrolls, and it's so fun and so sweet, and just, I love the characters, I love the camaraderie, I love the found family element of it, and it was a thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyable book. If you are a contemporary reader and you don't read fantasy, I still would encourage you to pick this up, because although we have orcs and mice and gnomes and all sorts of characters like that, it is definitely more of a contemporary book. It just happens to be in a fantasy setting. So highly, highly recommend this one. I gave this one 4.5 stars, which in call pile, I have not written down what that is in call pile, but it was high. It was up there, up in the late 8.8 something. So very close to 5 stars, but not quite there yet. But definitely really loved it. So yeah, that is the final book I finished. I do also just want to mention a book that I have soft DNF'd, and that is The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi. I have soft DNF'd this one because I'm not really sure how I feel about this book. I'm not really sure where it's going. It's beautiful, beautiful, lyrical, descriptive writing, and there's definitely a feeling of foreboding, and there's definitely a feeling of something is not quite right and you want to find out what happened. But even though I love lyrical writing, it's a little too descriptive for me. But I have soft DNF'd it for the moment because I'm not sure if it's just a case of not the right time. I definitely want to find out what happened to one of the characters, which we hear about but we know is not currently in the picture. I don't know if that makes any sense. So the premise of the book is about this man who meets this enigmatic woman who is the heir to a big family fortune, and they fall in love, they get married, but she makes him promise that he will never ask about her past. And then they have to go, one of her family members is sick, and they have to go back to her family home, and that's when some mysteries start to come to light. Yeah, so I'm intrigued by it, but I'm not sure. Let me know if you've read this, whether you liked it. Do you think it's worth continuing with? I'm pretty much exactly halfway. 288 pages and I'm up to 154. So just over halfway. So let me know if you think I should continue and finish it. And that's it. Those are all the books that I read in the month of June. Comment below if you'd like to tell me anything about your month in June, your reading, anything else you've been doing, you've been watching, you've been listening to. What are you in the mood for at the moment? Are you mood reading? Do you do TBRs? All of those things, let me know in the comments below. If you'd like to leave me a comment but you don't know what, then leave me a coffee cup emoji because of Legends and Lattes. All of my social media details are listed in the description below, so if you'd like to go and follow me on any of those other platforms, please feel free to do so. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I would absolutely love it if you would subscribe to my channel and give this video a thumbs up. And yeah, like I said, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time.